Evan Morales had worked near the ocean for most of his life. Even as a child, he felt calm whenever he heard the soft roll of waves brushing against the sand. Growing up, he learned to read the sea the same way some people read books. He noticed small things that others often missed, how a slight shift in the wind could mean a change in the weather, or how the color of the water could tell him whether the tide was rising or falling. Because of this natural awareness, becoming a lifeguard felt like the most natural path for him. It wasn't just a job. It was a responsibility he took with a full heart. On a warm morning in early summer, Evan stood on the deck of the coastal patrol boat, stretching his arms as the sunlight reflected off the wide blue surface. The air carried a pleasant mix of salt water, sunscreen, and warm breeze. The sky above was bright and clear, with only a few thin clouds drifting lazily across it. The rest of the crew moved around the boat, preparing for the day's routine shoreline sweep. It was supposed to be simple: check the waters, look for anyone who needed help, and return before the afternoon sun grew too strong. Captain Warren, a man with decades of experience at sea, stood near the helm giving instructions in his usual firm tone. He was known for being strict, focused, and determined to follow the schedule exactly as planned. Evan respected him, he always did, but there were times when he wished the captain would trust the opinions of others more freely. Captain Warren's confidence was strong, but sometimes it kept him from listening to new ideas or concerns. As the boat hummed forward through the soft waves, Evan leaned on the railing, letting the breeze brush against his face. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. The water looked calm, and the gentle movements of the boat felt almost soothing. But then something changed, something subtle, something quiet, but strong enough to catch his attention. The breeze shifted direction, not sharply, but noticeably. The temperature in the air dropped just a little. The clouds that had been floating harmlessly before now seemed to gather together, thickening around the edges. Evan narrowed his eyes and looked toward the horizon. The ocean, usually a bright shade of blue in the morning, now held streaks of dark gray beneath the surface. It wasn't alarming, but it wasn't normal either. It felt like the sea was preparing for something bigger, something unexpected. He took a slow breath and continued watching. Years of experience had taught him not to ignore small signs. Often, the tiniest shift was the first warning of a larger change. He glanced over his shoulder. The other crew members didn't seem concerned. They were laughing, organizing equipment, and talking about where they might eat lunch when they returned. To them, the day looked completely ordinary. Evan wished he could see it the same way, but his instincts didn't allow him to relax. He stepped toward Captain Warren, who was checking the navigation screen. "Captain," Evan said politely, making sure his tone stayed calm and respectful. "The weather seems to be shifting a little." The captain barely looked up. "Forecast says clear skies all day," he replied. "We'll be fine." "I know the forecast looked good," Evan said gently. "But something feels different. The clouds are building faster than usual, and the wind has changed direction. Maybe we should keep an eye on it." Captain Warren finally turned toward him, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "Evan, the radar is clean. Nothing unusual. We follow our patrol route, just like always." Evan nodded, though he wasn't satisfied. He didn't want to argue, he wasn't the type to push back forcefully. But he couldn't shake off the sense that something was forming in the distance. Still, he stepped back and returned to the side of the boat, eyes scanning the water. Minutes passed, and the signs continued to grow. The soft waves began to build a little higher, lifting and lowering the boat with a slow, steady rhythm. The sunlight dimmed slightly as the clouds drifted closer. The air grew cooler. None of it was extreme, but all of it together made Evan uneasy. He knew weather near the ocean could shift very quickly, sometimes without warning. He took another deep breath and tried to calm the uneasy feeling growing in his chest. Sometimes his instincts were early. Sometimes they were wrong. But very often, they were right. It wasn't fear he felt, just an awareness that the day might not stay as gentle as it seemed. A crew member named Lisa approached him with a friendly smile. She was one of Evan's closest friends on the team. "You look tense," she said. "Everything okay?" "Maybe," Evan replied, keeping his voice quiet. "The weather feels off. I don't know if it's anything serious, but I think we should stay alert." Lisa followed his gaze toward the horizon. She whispered. "It does look a little darker out there. Maybe it's nothing. But I trust your gut more than a weather app." Evan smiled softly at that. It helped to know that at least someone understood. Still, he didn't want to cause worry or disrupt the routine for no reason. So he kept watching the waves, studying every small movement. The boat continued cruising along the shoreline, passing quiet beaches and rocky edges where seabirds rested. The water around them shifted in color, from deep blue to a mix of green and gray. Evan noticed patterns forming in the waves, longer stretches between them, gentle yet unusual rolls. It was the kind of change that didn't show up on a device but could be felt by someone who spent years learning the ocean's mood. He thought about times in the past when small changes had warned him of strong winds coming, or when sudden calmness meant a current was shifting. He had learned through experience not to take these signs lightly. He walked over to the equipment area and checked the rescue gear, making sure everything was secured. The ropes were in good condition, the life rings were firmly attached, and the small rescue raft was fully inflated. He double-checked everything, not because he expected trouble, but because he wanted to be prepared if anything unexpected happened. Another gust of wind brushed past him, stronger than before. He looked up again. The sky was no longer bright. The clouds had grown darker, gathering slowly like a blanket stretching across the horizon. He turned toward the captain again, this time hoping the change was noticeable enough that the captain might reconsider. But Captain Warren seemed focused on staying on schedule. To him, the ocean still looked safe. He trusted equipment and forecasts more than instincts. And he believed that experience had taught him to avoid unnecessary worry. Evan sighed softly and returned to his post, determined to stay watchful. He knew he couldn't force anyone to believe him, but he could make sure he was ready to act quickly if anything happened. He stood quietly, listening to the steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic splash of the water. He felt connected to the sea, yet separated from the decisions that guided the boat. As minutes turned into an hour, the sky continued to dim little by little. The other crew members began noticing the shift as well, though most brushed it off as a normal change in the day. Only Lisa looked at the sky with the same sense of curiosity and caution that Evan felt. "You really think something's coming?" she asked softly. Evan nodded. "Maybe not right away," he replied. "But something feels like it's building. I just hope we're prepared if it does." He glanced once more toward the horizon, where the clouds had thickened into a gentle but steady layer of gray. The wind whipped lightly against his jacket. The waves rolled in longer, slower movements, like the ocean was breathing deeper than before. Evan didn't know exactly what the day would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. The sea was speaking in its own quiet language, and he could only hope that the others would hear it before it was too late. The patrol boat continued its smooth journey along the coastline, but Evan never took his eyes off the water. Even though his earlier concern had faded from everyone's mind, he stayed alert. The sky was now covered with soft gray clouds, stretching farther and thicker than before. The sunlight still broke through here and there, but the brightness of the morning had dimmed into a quieter, moodier light. The sea, too, had changed. The once bright shades of blue now carried a deeper tone, almost as if the water knew something the people on the boat didn't. The waves moved with a gentle but unusual rhythm, long, rolling pushes, each one a little more noticeable than the last. Evan crossed his arms and leaned slightly forward, studying everything with a calm but focused expression. The captain continued steering with confidence. The navigation system still showed no warnings, and the weather app on his phone confirmed clear conditions. To him, everything seemed perfectly normal. The rest of the crew followed his attitude, carrying on with their tasks. Evan didn't want to disturb anyone, especially if he wasn't completely sure, but the uneasy feeling inside him continued to grow. Lisa walked over and stood beside him again, her eyes following his gaze toward the horizon. "You're still watching the sky?" she asked gently. "Yeah," Evan replied. "The clouds are building faster than they should. I don't know if it's going to turn into anything big, but I want to be ready." She nodded. Well, if something does happen, at least we have you here. Her words were comforting. But Evan didn't relax. Something felt different in the air, like the silence before a change. He took a slow breath and continued observing the water. The boat hummed forward steadily, leaving a long trail of white foam behind. Suddenly, Lisa pointed toward the distance. Hey, what's that? Do you see something? Evan narrowed his eyes and leaned closer to the railing. At first, he didn't notice anything unusual. The sea stretched out endlessly, the waves rising and falling in slow motion. But then, just beyond a small cluster of foam, he saw something bobbing slightly in the water. It looked small, but it moved differently from the waves. Hold on, Evan said, as he focused more sharply. The object rose again with a wave, revealing its shape for a second. It was round, bright, and curved on one side. A kayak, a single-person kayak, flipped upside down with one end sticking out of the water. His heart tightened. "Captain," Evan called, raising his voice just enough to be heard clearly. "We've got something in the water." The captain looked up but didn't seem alarmed. "What is it?" "A capsized kayak," Evan said, his tone steady but urgent. Someone might be out there. That got everyone's attention. 2 crew members rushed to the side to look. The captain adjusted the boat's direction slightly so they could get a better view. As they drew closer, the kayak became clearer. It was definitely overturned, its bright orange color standing out against the darker water. Near it, something seemed to be moving, but it was hard to see from the distance. Evan grabbed the binoculars and steadied his hands. When he looked through them, his breath caught in his throat. "There's a person," he said quickly. "Someone's holding on to the kayak." Lisa's face tightened with worry. "Are they okay?" "I can't tell," Evan answered, "but they're definitely struggling." He lowered the binoculars and turned toward the captain. "We need to help them." The captain squinted toward the kayak, observing the waves around it. "How far out is it?" he asked. "A few hundred meters," Evan replied. "We can reach them fast." The crew members looked at the captain, waiting for his response. The captain hesitated, glancing again at the sky, and then at the navigation system. The clouds overhead thickened a little more, and the wind brushed against the side of the boat with growing strength. Evan understood the hesitation. The weather wasn't perfect, and approaching a person in rough water required careful handling. But the person clinging to the kayak didn't seem to have much time. The waves rolled higher, and the kayak rocked dangerously each time. "Captain," Evan said, keeping his voice calm but firm, "this might be our only chance to get to them. We can't leave them there." The captain frowned thoughtfully. "The wind is picking up," he said. "I don't want us getting too close if the sea becomes unpredictable." Evan nodded. "I understand. But if we move slowly and carefully, we can reach them safely. We've handled rescues under tougher conditions." Lisa stepped forward. "We'll be careful. We can do it." The captain looked from Evan to Lisa, then back toward the kayak. He sighed softly, then gave a small nod. "All right. We'll get closer." Evan felt a flash of relief. The captain adjusted the wheel, steering the boat toward the overturned kayak. As they got nearer, the waves began rocking the boat more than before. It wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't the calm water they had started in earlier that morning. The air grew cooler, carrying a hint of moisture, as if the sky might release something soon. The kayakers' movements became clearer now. It was a single person wearing a life jacket, clinging tightly to the kayak's edge. From the way they shifted and tried to lift their head above each incoming wave, it was clear they were tired. Very tired. "Get the rescue raft ready," Evan told the crew. 2 team members quickly prepared the small inflatable raft that could be lowered into the water during emergencies. Evan checked the ropes, the securing clips, and the paddles before stepping toward the captain. "I'll go down in the raft," Evan said. "I'm the lightest, and I can reach them fast." The captain hesitated. He looked again at the clouds, then at the growing size of the waves. "Are you sure you can handle it?" he asked. Yes, Evan replied confidently. I've handled worse conditions, and the kayaker doesn't look like they can hold on much longer. We need to help them now. The captain took a moment to think, then nodded slowly. All right. But be careful. If anything feels unsafe, you pull back immediately. Evan nodded and hurried to the raft. The crew lowered it gently into the water. The raft rocked with each wave, but it stayed steady enough for Evan to climb in. He grabbed the paddles, took a deep breath, and prepared to push off. But before he could move away from the boat, something happened. A strong, sharp gust of wind pushed against the side of the rescue boat, making it lean slightly. The waves suddenly lifted higher, slapping against the hull of the patrol boat. Everyone tensed. The shift was sudden, too sudden to ignore. Evan froze, gripping the paddles tightly. He looked up at the captain, whose expression had changed from cautious to concerned. Evan, the captain said, raising his voice to be heard over the wind. Wait. Evan's heart beat hard. Captain, we don't have time. Wait. The captain repeated, stepping closer to the railing. The waves are growing too fast. If you go into that water right now, it might push you away from the boat. Evan looked back at the kayaker. The person still clung to the kayak, their arms weak, their head barely above the surface. The raft rocked beneath Evan as the waves grew even choppier. Time felt painfully slow. Captain, Evan said urgently, if I don't go now, they might not last long. The captain shook his head, his voice steady but firm. We'll stay close, but I'm not letting you launch yet. The conditions just changed. Give it a moment. Evan tightened his grip on the paddles, torn between the captain's order and the sight of the struggling kayaker. Every second felt heavier than the last. The sea was shifting, and so was the day. What had started as a calm morning was turning into something far more unpredictable. Evan could only hope that the moment of delay wouldn't cost someone their chance at safety. Evan held tightly to the sides of the small rescue raft as it bounced gently on the growing waves. He sat there waiting for a signal, every muscle in his body tense with urgency. He could still see the kayaker clinging to the overturned kayak, their arms wrapped around it with visible effort. Each wave lifted them slightly and then lowered them again, making their movements slower and weaker. Evan felt his chest tighten. Every moment of delay felt heavier than the last. The wind brushed across the surface of the water with more force than before, creating tiny trails of white foam. The sky above had changed to a deeper shade of gray, covering the sun entirely now. Evan looked up at Captain Warren, who stood near the railing of the patrol boat with a serious expression on his face. The captain wasn't shouting or panicking. He was simply thinking, calculating, studying every detail before allowing a risky move. But to Evan, thinking felt like a luxury they didn't have right now. Captain, Evan called with steady urgency. We need to move. The kayaker is losing strength. The captain shook his head slowly. Not yet, he said. The waves are changing direction. I need to make sure we won't put you in danger. Evan looked out at the water again. Yes. The waves were unpredictable, but he had trained for this. He was confident he could balance the raft and reach the kayaker safely. He had done similar rescues before, even in tougher conditions, but he also knew that patience was part of teamwork. Still, watching someone struggle while being unable to help felt almost unbearable. Lisa appeared beside the captain, worry written across her face. She looked down at Evan. Just stay ready, she said softly. We'll get you out there. Evan nodded, though frustration pulled at him. He kept his eyes on the kayaker. The person lifted a hand once, perhaps trying to wave for help, but the movement was small and weak. It made Evan's breath catch. He imagined how cold the water must feel. How tiring it must be to hold onto a slippery surface while being pushed around by every wave. Please, Evan said again, his voice louder this time. We can't wait. Let me go. But the captain raised a hand, signaling him to stop. Evan, listening to instructions is just as important as helping. Trust me. Those words made Evan feel torn. He trusted the captain. He always had. But right now, he trusted something else, even more. His training, his intuition, and the deep sense of responsibility he felt toward the person in the water. Another wave hit the patrol boat, gently but noticeably rocking it. The crew members held onto the rails. The wind picked up once again, blowing across the deck and causing loose items to rattle. Evan watched the kayaker struggle again. He saw the person's fingers slip slightly before grabbing hold again. It was like watching someone lose their grip on a lifeline. Bit by bit, Evan felt his heart beating faster. He knew he could help. He knew he could reach them. He also knew he couldn't go against the captain's order. Finally, after several long, tense moments, the captain took a deep breath and said, "All right, let's try again. But the moment I say return, you come back immediately." Relief washed through Evan like a warm wave. He nodded quickly. Understood. The captain motioned for the crew to steady the raft. They held the ropes firmly as Evan positioned himself to begin paddling. The waves rocked the raft, but not enough to stop him. He felt hopeful this was their chance, but just as the crew prepared to release the raft into open water, a sudden large wave approached from the left side. It wasn't huge or threatening, but it was strong enough to make the patrol boat dip slightly. The raft jerked in place, and the crew members had to tighten their grip. The captain quickly stepped forward. "Pull him back," he ordered. Evan's hope dropped instantly. "Captain, no." That wave was small. It came from a different angle, Captain Warren interrupted firmly. "This means the tide is shifting unevenly. That makes the rescue unpredictable." Evan clenched his jaw. "But the kayaker." "Evan," the captain said, lowering his voice but keeping it serious. "If these waves push your raft away, we might not be able to get you back quickly. I won't risk you drifting off in this weather." The crew slowly pulled the raft closer to the boat again. Evan felt frustration building inside him, but he didn't show it. He knew the captain wasn't trying to stop the rescue, he was trying to protect everyone. Still, every second felt like a weight pressing down on Evan's shoulders. He looked at the kayaker again. The person continued holding onto the kayak, but their grip seemed weaker. Their head rested forward, almost touching the water. Evan swallowed hard. He wanted to shout, to jump into the water himself, to do anything that would close the distance between them. But he couldn't. Not without permission. "Captain," Evan said softly but firmly, "I've done these rescues before. I know how to balance the raft. I know how far to go. I can handle it." The captain studied him, his eyes thoughtful, a small crease forming on his forehead. He wasn't ignoring Evan's confidence, he was weighing it against the new state of the sea. Another wave brushed against the side of the boat. It wasn't large, but it came from yet another direction. The water was no longer moving in a steady, predictable pattern. It twisted and turned in different directions, almost like the ocean was unsure of itself. The captain exhaled slowly. "Evan, I want to save that person just as much as you do. But going now might lead to two people needing help instead of one. And right now, I have to make a choice that keeps the team safe." Evan lowered his head for a moment. He didn't want to admit it, but he understood. A rescue wasn't just about reaching someone. It was about making sure the rescuer made it back as well. But knowing that didn't make the situation any easier. Lisa leaned over the railing. "Evan, we're going to figure this out. Don't lose hope." He looked up at her and nodded weakly. Hope was the only thing he could hold on to at the moment. Hope and the determination to be ready the moment he got another chance. The captain turned the boat slightly to keep it steady against the shifting waves. The crew gathered near the railings, scanning the water and staying alert. Everyone could feel the tension in the air. Everyone saw the kayaker. Everyone wanted to help. Minutes passed slowly, each one feeling longer than the last. Evan sat in the raft, gripping the paddles tightly, his eyes fixed on the struggling figure. The waves weren't huge, but they were confusing, unpredictable, and tiring for anyone in the water. Evan whispered under his breath, "Hold on, just a little longer." We're right here. Another breeze passed over the sea, carrying a cool and faint dampness. Evan hoped it wouldn't start raining. Rain would make everything harder. He kept praying silently that the weather would settle instead of worsening. The captain finally called down to him. Evan, stay in the raft. Be ready. If there's even a small window of calm, I'll send you out. Evan nodded. He wasn't giving up. Not unless the kayaker disappeared from sight. Suddenly, a soft voice broke the tense silence. It was Lisa. Her tone gentle but heavy with worry. Evan. Look. He turned quickly toward her. She pointed at the kayaker. The person had slipped slightly lower in the water. Their arms moved, but slowly, too slowly. The kayak rocked harder with each wave. Evan's heart dropped. Captain, he said loudly. We're running out of time. I know, the captain replied, his voice tight with concern. I'm watching. The wind slowed just a little. The water smoothed for a brief moment. Evan held his breath. Maybe, just maybe, this was the window they needed. But before the captain could speak, another wave rolled in from behind the kayaker, causing the kayak to tilt sharply. The kayaker barely managed to grip it again. The moment was gone. Evan felt helpless. For the first time that day, he felt the painful weight of being unable to move forward. He wasn't used to waiting. He wasn't used to standing still while someone else needed him. But he wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. He stayed in the raft, grip tight, eyes focused, heart steady, ready to launch the moment the captain gave the signal. And even though everything around him seemed uncertain, one thing remained clear. He would not let that person out of his sight. Not until they were safe. The sky continued to darken above the patrol boat, slowly turning from gentle gray to a deeper, heavier shade. The air grew cooler, brushing against the faces of everyone on board. The wind no longer came in soft breezes. It carried a steady push now, like the beginning of something stronger. The waves, too, seemed to breathe differently. Instead of slow, predictable rolls, they moved with a restless energy that kept the boat shifting from side to side. Evan remained in the rescue raft, gripping the paddles tightly. He didn't feel tired. Even though his arms were stiff from holding the same position for so long, his mind stayed focused on one thing: the kayaker still clinging to the overturned kayak in the distance. Every time the person's head rose above the water, Evan felt a tiny spark of hope. Every time they sank a little lower, that spark dimmed. He kept telling himself, I have to be ready. I can't look away. I can't lose focus. He repeated these thoughts because they kept him steady, like anchors for his mind. The crew on the patrol boat moved around him carefully, holding ropes, adjusting their positions, and waiting for the captain's command. No one wanted to stand still, but no one wanted to make a wrong move either. The situation had grown too delicate. Lisa leaned against the railing again, her eyes locked on the kayaker. They're fighting hard, she whispered, though Evan could still hear her over the wind. But they're getting tired. Evan nodded slowly. I know. They need us now more than ever. Each second felt long and stretched, as if time itself was moving slower than usual. Evan wished he had the power to calm the sea, even just enough to give them a short window of safety, but all he could do was wait and watch. Another wave approached, lifting the patrol boat and the rescue raft with the ease of a giant hand. The raft bounced gently, but not dangerously. Evan stayed balanced. He studied the angle of the waves, trying to read whether the pattern was calming or growing more chaotic. It was hard to tell. The captain watched closely too. He stood tall, his hands resting on the rail, his eyes scanning everything: the waves, the clouds, the kayaker, the raft. He wasn't stubborn. He was cautious, and he had the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. After a few minutes of silence, Evan decided to speak again. Captain, he said in a calm but urgent tone, I can make it. I've trained for this exact type of rescue. Please, let me go. Captain Warren didn't answer right away. He kept looking at the kayaker, then at the growing waves, and then finally at Evan. His face showed a mix of concern and conflict. I know you can handle a lot, Evan, he said, but this isn't only about skill. The sea is unstable right now. I can't risk losing control of the raft once you're in it. Evan pressed his lips together. He respected the captain deeply, but watching the kayaker struggle felt like watching someone drift slowly away from safety. It hurt to stay still. It hurt even more to be held back by forces he couldn't control. The waves rolled again, bigger this time. The boat leaned gently to the right, prompting the crew to grab hold of the rails. Evan felt the raft tilt beneath him, but he steadied himself easily. Lisa's hand tightened on the rail. "Captain," she said softly, "we might not have much time." The kayaker is barely holding their head above the water. The captain's jaw tightened. "I see it," he replied quietly. Across the water, the kayaker's movements became slower. Their fingers slipped off the kayak for a moment before finding it again. The kayak wobbled gently but remained overturned. Evan felt his heart squeeze painfully. "Please," he said softly, almost a whisper. "Just let me go. Just let me go." He wasn't trying to challenge the captain. He wasn't trying to disobey him. He just wanted to save a life. He wanted to trust his training and instincts. But just as the captain prepared to respond, something unexpected happened. A large swell rose in the distance, a long, smooth wave that rolled toward them. It wasn't tall or dangerous, but it carried power. When it reached the patrol boat, the entire vessel lifted higher than before. The rescue raft rose too, but when it fell back down, it bounced harder. Evan nearly lost his balance but steadied himself in time. The captain shook his head immediately. "That's it," he said. "We're pulling you back in. The waves are rising. It's not safe to launch." Evan felt his stomach drop, but he didn't argue. He knew the rule. When the captain gave a direct command, he followed it. It was about safety. It was about trust. It was about working as a team. The crew began pulling the raft closer to the boat. The rope tightened, and the raft slid slowly toward the deck. But Evan couldn't take his eyes off the kayaker. The person was slipping lower into the water. Their arms were shaking visibly, almost slipping off the kayak every time a wave passed. "Captain," Evan said, his voice breaking slightly, "if we don't go now, we might lose them." Captain Warren exhaled, long and heavy. "I know. And I don't like this any more than you do." The wind grew louder. The clouds thickened even more. A mist-like spray rose off the waves with each splash, brushing across the deck and the crew's faces. The boat rocked again, and the crew instinctively steadied themselves. Evan felt his pulse race. He was ready if only he had the chance. Lisa spoke next, gently but urgently. "Captain, maybe we should circle around the kayaker. A different angle might help. The waves might be calmer there." The captain nodded slowly. "It's possible. But we need to be careful." He stepped to the wheel and carefully turned the boat. The engine hummed softly as the patrol boat shifted directions, moving in a wide circle around the struggling kayaker. Evan watched the waves closely as the boat repositioned itself. Maybe Lisa was right. Maybe the waves would be calmer from another angle. But as they circled, Evan saw something that made his breath catch. The kayaker's hand finally slipped off the kayak for more than a second. The person tried to grab the kayak again, but their fingers missed. Their arms splashed weakly against the water. They were tired, completely drained. "Captain!" Evan shouted instantly. "They're slipping! They're slipping!" The captain leaned over the rail, eyes widening. "I see it." Another wave rolled in, gently tipping the kayak. The kayaker grabbed it again, but with less strength. Evan's hands shook from how tightly he held the paddles. "Please," he whispered again. "Please, let me go." But the captain raised a hand firmly. "Not yet." Evan felt crushed. He looked down at the raft, at the water, at the kayaker, so far, yet so close. The crew gathered near the rail, watching anxiously. No one spoke now. No one moved too quickly. They all felt the weight of the moment. A soft drizzle began to fall. Barely noticeable at first. Small drops hit the surface of the sea, blending with the foam. Lisa whispered, "This is getting worse." Evan nodded, "And they're running out of time." A wave pushed the kayak again. This time, the kayaker didn't straighten up quickly. Their arms barely moved. Their head dipped lower. Evan felt something inside him tighten painfully. He felt helpless, more helpless than he had ever felt in his career. The boat rocked gently, the raft swaying with it. "Stay strong," Evan whispered toward the kayaker, though his voice couldn't reach them. "We're here. We're trying." He never once considered giving up. He never once considered looking away. Even though he was being held back, his heart stayed focused. His instincts stayed ready, and though the storm grew heavier, Evan never lost sight of the figure in the water. Not for a single moment. He just hoped deeply, desperately, that the next moment would give them the chance they needed. Because he was ready, more ready than ever. And he wasn't going to let that person slip away, not if he had anything to say about it. The storm lasted longer than anyone expected. For what felt like hours, the patrol boat moved carefully through the restless waves. Never drifting far from the kayaker, Evan stayed in the raft the entire time, refusing to leave his position even when the crew suggested he take a break. He simply shook his head. He wasn't going anywhere until he knew the kayaker was safe. Lightning never appeared, nor did loud thunder. But the sky remained covered with thick clouds, and a steady curtain of light rain misted over the water. The waves rose and fell in an uneven pattern, making the sea look like a giant breathing creature. Finally, slowly, the storm began to weaken. The wind lost some of its strength. The waves softened. The rain thinned into a gentle drizzle. The sky stayed cloudy, but the heavy pressure in the air started to ease. Evan lifted his head slightly and squinted toward the horizon. He could see the change, slight, but enough. The sea was calming. "Captain," Evan called, hope lighting his voice. "The waves are settling." Captain Warren stepped to the edge of the deck and looked out carefully. He studied the water for a long moment, evaluating every detail just the way he always did. The crew waited silently, watching his expression. Finally, the captain nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "This is the break we've been waiting for." Evan's heart lifted. "Can I go?" The captain met his eyes. There was no hesitation now. "Go. Bring them back." Evan didn't wait for a second repetition. The crew quickly lowered the rescue raft once more, making sure the ropes were free. The raft touched the water with a soft bounce, and Evan grabbed the paddles tightly. He pushed off with steady, practiced movements. For the first time in hours, he was finally moving toward the kayaker. The water was still active but far gentler than before. Evan's raft slid smoothly forward, guided by his strong arms and years of training. Every stroke brought him closer. Every meter made the shape of the struggling kayaker clearer. "Hold on," Evan whispered under his breath. "I'm almost there. Don't let go yet." The kayaker's body looked tired, but they still clung to the overturned kayak, though their grip was extremely weak. Their head lifted just above the water with effort. As Evan approached, he slowed down, not wanting to create waves that might disturb them. "Hey," he called gently. "I'm here to help. You're going to be okay." The kayaker barely lifted their head, but Evan saw a small movement, some sign they had heard him. That small gesture filled him with determination. He reached out with one hand while keeping the raft steady with the other. "I've got you," he said softly. "You're safe now." The kayaker didn't have the strength to respond with words, but their hand moved toward him. Evan grabbed it carefully, securing their wrist with a strong, supportive grip. "Good," he said. "You're doing great. I'm going to pull you up slowly. Just stay relaxed." He guided them onto the raft, helping them position their arms and legs safely. Their breathing was unsteady, but they were conscious. That was enough. That was everything. Once the kayaker was safely inside the raft, Evan signaled to the patrol boat. The crew waved back, preparing to pull them in. "You're going to be fine," Evan reassured the kayaker again. "We're almost back to the boat. Just hold on a little longer." The kayaker nodded faintly. The crew began pulling the raft slowly toward the boat. Evan stayed beside the kayaker, supporting them so they wouldn't slip. The waves brushed gently beneath the raft, and Evan felt grateful, deeply grateful that the sea had quieted when it did. When they reached the side of the patrol boat, 2 crew members leaned over the railing to help lift the kayaker onto the deck. Evan climbed up after them, exhausted but relieved. The moment his feet touched the deck, he exhaled a long, shaky breath. He looked at the kayaker now lying safely wrapped in a blanket. They looked drained, cold, and shaken. But alive. And alive was enough. Captain Warren stepped beside Evan. "Good work," he said softly. Evan nodded, still catching his breath. "We made it just in time." The captain looked at him for a long moment. "I know I held you back earlier," he said, his voice carrying a mix of sincerity and weight. "But I had to make sure you didn't end up in danger yourself." Evan met his gaze. "I understand," he replied gently. "I wasn't angry. I couldn't stand seeing them struggle. And that's what makes you a good lifeguard," the captain said. "But sometimes, leading means choosing the moment when the risk is lowest. Not everyone sees that part." Evan nodded again. He wasn't upset anymore. He respected the captain, and he understood the responsibility that came with leadership. Saving lives wasn't only about bravery, it was also about timing, safety, and teamwork. Once the kayaker was stable, the crew moved them to a secure spot inside the cabin. They offered warm fluids, checked their breathing, and made sure they were comfortable. Evan stayed nearby, watching quietly. After a few minutes, the kayaker opened their eyes and looked directly at him. Their voice was faint and raspy. "Thank you for not giving up." Evan smiled gently. "You held on for a long time. You helped yourself, too." The kayaker's eyes filled slightly, not with sadness, but with quiet relief. "I tried," they whispered. "The waves kept pulling me. I thought maybe no one would see me." Evan shook his head softly. "We saw you, and we weren't going to leave you." Later, when the patrol boat headed back toward the shore, the air finally began to clear. The clouds separated slowly, letting a soft glow of sunlight through. The sea, once restless and wild, returned to its gentle rhythm. Evan stood on the deck beside the captain. They watched the horizon together in comfortable silence. The wind was calm now, carrying only the mild scent of salt water and fresh air. The captain spoke first. "You did everything right today." Evan looked at him with a small smile. "I just wanted to help." "And you did," the captain said. "But remember, sometimes the hardest part of this job is waiting. You waited when it mattered. And because of that, you were able to make the rescue safely." Evan thought about that. He realized it was true. If he had gone earlier when the waves were unpredictable, things might have turned out differently. He might not have reached the kayaker, or he might have needed help himself. The captain rested a hand on his shoulder briefly. "You have good instincts," he said. "Trust them, but also trust your team." Evan nodded slowly, taking in the words, "I will." He looked back at the kayaker, who was resting peacefully now. A quiet sense of pride filled him, not loud, not dramatic, just steady and warm. Lisa joined them on the deck. "You know," she said with a smile, "today was proof of something." "What's that?" Evan asked. "You always say the ocean speaks," she said. "And today, you listened." Evan let out a small laugh. "Maybe I did." The patrol boat glided smoothly toward the harbor. The sea sparkled faintly as the clouds continued to open. Everything felt calm, peaceful, and bright even after such a challenging day. Evan closed his eyes for a moment and let the fresh air surround him. He felt grateful for the kayaker's safety, for his team's support, and even for the captain's caution. The experience had taught him something important. Saving lives wasn't only about rushing in. Sometimes it required patience, timing, and trust. When he opened his eyes again, he looked out at the horizon with a deep sense of appreciation. The sea would always be unpredictable, but as long as he had his instincts, his training, and his team beside him, he knew he could face whatever came next. And today, against the odds, they had brought someone safely back home. That was enough. That was everything.